Hello Internet, says Skorikowski, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This month marks the 10-year anniversary of my Monster Hunter urban fantasy novel Dämoren. April 2014, my debut novel released, which led to 3 sequel novels and a handful of short stories in my Valducan series. It was the culmination of years of hard work and something that changed my life. Even this channel is a direct result of that occasion. So to commemorate that, I just want to talk about Dämoren and its sequels, where they came from, the highs, the lows, and how all of that played out, much as I did for my Black Raven retrospective I posted back in 2018. I started writing shortly after college as a way to pass the time, and I became very active in the online writing workshop for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and I started work on what I'd hoped would be the next great fantasy novel. Now, during that time, I wrote and sold a few short stories, including some of my Black Raven adventures, and after finishing my first novel, Dreams of Lost Souls, the first in my Empire of Deceit series, I started on a sequel novel as I started querying to find an agent for the first book, and that did not go too well. Rejection after rejection after rejection. And finally, I got pretty discouraged. Eventually, for the lack of a better word, I got guilted into attending FinCon 2011, which some friends were helping organize that, and they pushed me into joining their writer's workshop, and I could not imagine at the time the effect that this would have on me. Now, the workshop was led by a gentleman named Lou Anders, who had just won the Hugo Award for editing just a month before, and the workshop focused on the first 10 pages of our manuscript. So each of us in there, we sent each other the first 10 pages of our manuscript, several weeks in advance. That way we could all peer review those and kind of know what everybody had. And then we spent pretty much 3 days locked in a room with Lou Anders as he walked us through his analysis of everyone's submissions. And it was just an eye-opening experience. And the end result of all that was Lou pretty much telling me that my novel was unpublishable crap, though he did say it a lot nicer than that, but that was, pretty much the effect that it had. But the process of writing it had taught me how to write. So I knew how to write now, and he told me I should go out and write a publishable book. Now, this might sound like it would be just crushing to hear. It was almost 200,000 words and several years into this series, and you don't want to hear that it's terrible after all that, but I wasn't crushed at all. I was surprised by that. I was relieved. Lou had merely voiced something that I knew, so it was kind of like he was giving me permission to put it away and work on something else instead. So it was really liberating for him to tell me that. In fact, the previous few years as I was writing that novel, I'd been toying with the idea of a modern-day Monster Hunter novel. So once I was done with Empire of Deceit, I was going to work on that. Now, none of my ideas were really solid things, but just really interesting concepts. So fired up from a great weekend workshop, I dusted off all those rough ideas and started writing Dämoren the following week. The novel originated as 2 separate ideas. The first idea is I wanted to figure out how to make a magical gun for Dungeons and Dragons. A magical sword or a magical axe, those make sense, right? The blade is enchanted, you hit the bad guy with the blade, and the magic of the blade hurts the bad guy. But with a magic gun, the gun itself never actually touches the bad guy, only the bullet does that. So the solution that I came up with is that inside the barrel was inscribed a spell or a prayer, and then the bullet, as it's traveling through the barrel, it gets charged with this enchantment. But the last word or the last symbol of this spell or prayer, something like Amen, was molded into the bullet, and that enchantment, as the bullet hit that certain point, it would then charge up with the magic and imbue the bullet with all the power, and then carry that magic off to the target and hurt the target. So this meant that everything about the gun, the bullet itself, would have to be specially made, which led to the idea that the brass shells and the bullet mold and the powder, all of this would have to be part of this as the gunslinger would load their special shells. So this gave way to the idea that the gun was going to be previously been a magic sword that broke, and then the owner took those kind of broken pieces and had them turned into what at the time would have been the most cutting-edge weapon, a single-action revolver, and then all of the parts of the sword, such as the bronze guns, cross guards, and all that would have been melted down and used as the shells for this gun. And some of the blade became the bullet mold, and through this broken magic sword would be reborn into this revolver. The second unrelated idea was the notion that supernatural creatures like werewolves and vampires and the like were not diseases. I never really liked the idea that modern take that those were just diseases instead of some supernatural curse, but instead it's actually an evil spirit, like a demonic possession is actually what the vampire or the werewolf is. So if you were to shoot a werewolf with a silver bullet, you're just going to kill the host body, but then the werewolf spirit would simply move on to another victim that had marked somewhere else. So that way, if a vampire, let's say, infects 4 people, you don't suddenly have 5 vampires now, but you just have a single vampire that's can move around between 5 possible hosts, but it's still just one single vampire. And the only way that you could possibly kill this monster, actually truly kill the evil spirit itself, is with an enchanted weapon, which of course, enchanted weapons are going to be incredibly rare. So I imagine this team of modern day monster hunters decked out in full tactical kit, but among all the Kevlar and automatic weapons, each of them also had this ancient weapon at their hip, like a mace or Egyptian khopesh. It was actually quite a while before I remembered that magic gun idea that I had earlier, and it just dovetailed perfectly into that, so those two ideas became one. I originally envisioned Dämoren as being crafted by Beretta, a very old Italian gun manufacturer, but Beretta really didn't work much with revolvers back then, so I changed it to being a Holland & Holland out of England. But then I discovered cutlass revolvers, namely the beautiful cutlass revolvers from Dumonthier, a French gunsmith from the 19th century. And I love the idea that part of the sword's original blade was now incorporated into the design of this pistol. Now, later on after it was published, some reviewers accused me of getting the idea from anime or Final Fantasy, but nope. Dumonthier was a very real guy, and I put a lot of time into researching what little information I could find to put in the book, so take that to all you haters that said I ripped off anime. Dumonthier was real. Starting it out, I only knew what the first 2 chapters, or really the first chapter and a half of what the book would be. There was the scene where Matt is first introduced to Dämoren and his mentor Clay at the very beginning, followed by fast-forwarding to him as an adult and trying to get an antique gun through customs, and then going off to a hotel and then melting down some antique silverware to mold some bullets with, kind of saying that now the job is on. So, no, those were actually going to be 2 separate ideas for an opening chapter of a book, but I just decided to go ahead and use them both and thought it worked pretty well. After that, I had a few cinematic moments in my head of what I would want in this book, but no real idea of who these characters were or how they got there, but I simply just started off writing the book assuming that I would figure all that out by the time that I got there. And I was a couple chapters in before my wife and we traveled to Italy for 2 weeks. We'd gone to Italy a couple times before, but we wanted to dedicate some real time to Florence and Venice. Now, in Florence, I decided the book would also lead the hero there. I even got to throw in a little nod to Cellini's Perseus with the head of Medusa, one of my very favorite sculptures in the world. When visiting Monteregione, which I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that, it's a tiny medieval walled city in Tuscany, and I knew that is where I wanted my book's climax to take place, though I ended up making my own little town for the book that was very much inspired by this one. It took me 15 months to finish writing Dämoren, and it came to 98,000 words once it was all said and done, and then I started out the whole process of querying this for an agent. Now, for those of you who don't know what querying a novel entails, you essentially have to pitch your entire book in just 3 to 5 sentences and in a way that tells an agent or editor, what the book is about, who the main characters are, any hooks, kind of the moods of the novel, in a way that hooks them and they want to know more about it, and they ask you for some sample pages or chapters or maybe the full manuscript. It is hell. Pitching a novel is absolute hell. I attended the 2013 DFW Writers Conference, hoping to find an agent there, and after attending a panel and crafting a query letter, which also just so happened to have Lou Anders there in attendance, I reworked my query letter, so by the end of the whole conference, I then submitted this to their big query letter contest that they do that ends the entire thing, where they read your query letter out before the whole conference, and all the agents there will get to ding you if that's the point that they would stop reading, if there's any problem with it, and I was the only person to make it through without a single person docking it. Now, for those wondering what it said, my query letter read, 14 years ago, a pack of Wendigos killed Spencer Mallory's family and damned his soul. Now he's a demon hunter armed with a holy revolver named Dämoren. After a violent series of murders leaves only 50 holy weapons in the world, Spencer is recruited by the Valducans, an ancient order of demon hunters. Many of the hunters do not trust him because he is possessed. When sabotage and assassinations begin, the Valducans know there is a spy in their ranks, and Spencer becomes the core of their suspicions. Desperate to prove himself and to protect Dämoren, Spencer fights to gain their trust and discover the nature of the entity residing within him. Dämoren is a 98,000-word supernatural fantasy set in North America and Europe. My short stories have appeared in Black Static and Flashing Sword magazines, as well as yada yada yada. Thank you for your consideration. Please represent me. Now, for anyone familiar with Dämoren, you're kind of wondering, why are you talking about Spencer Mallory instead of Matt? The reason is the first chapter of the book, he's named Spencer, and then by chapter 2 has changed his name to Matt. But an agent that asked for the first 10 pages, or if you submitted it along with the manuscript and they're reading along, they're going to be seeing the name Spencer and just wondering, when this Matt guy in your query letter was going to show up. So I went ahead and just used the name Spencer for the query letter. That way the agent would know that this was the person in the query letter. And then if they keep reading, by page 12 or so, they can see that he's changed his name and they'll figure that out for themselves. Anyway, armed with this now proven query letter, Dämoren was rejected 82 times. It was crushing. Only 44 of the query letters that I sent out even bothered to send me a response to it. The rest of them just silence. And even after a few of them asked for full manuscript requests, some of them still ghosted me. They asked for the full manuscript and then never heard anything back. But after 9 months, I sent a query letter off to a brand new publisher called Ragnarok Publications. They just hit the scene with a Kickstarter for a kaiju anthology that had some pretty good names on it. And through friends of friends connections, I had one of the owners as one of my Facebook connections, and we liked each other's memes and whatnot. So I reached out to him and I asked, when Ragnarok was planning on opening up to novel submissions. And he said, no, we're not going to be opening for a while, but go ahead and send that in and send it our way and we'll get a look at it. Well, a few weeks later, I got a message from their editor, Tim Markowitz. He liked what he read, but he wanted to know if I'd be willing to make a few pretty big changes to it. And I agreed. At that point, I'd been querying it for 9 months. I'd have been agreeing to just about anything at that point. So by December 2013, I had signed and sold my first novel. Well, the next few months after that were just a whirlwind of editing and promotion. But one notable thing that happened during that time is my wife and I were visiting some friends that were much older than we were, and he had made a pretty successful career in marketing. So we were talking about, my novel coming out and everything. And he said that I needed to make a YouTube channel. He says, the second largest search engine in the world, and I should really get on that in order to get my name out there. I said I had no idea what I wanted to make a channel about. Originally, he said, well, make it about writing. I'm like, well, I've only written one novel. Brandon Sanderson's got a YouTube channel out there and he has a ton more stuff than me, so it's not like I can compete with Brandon Sanderson. He said, look, it doesn't matter what the YouTube channel is about, just get a YouTube channel out there. And I said, okay, I'll think about it, which, really wasn't planning on doing, but that bug was dropped in my ear. And spoiler, I eventually figured out what I wanted to make a channel about. So release day rolled around and reception was actually pretty good and it picked up pretty quickly. I had pushed for an audiobook release because I'm a big fan of audiobooks, so by August, Dämoren was released on Audible and narrated by the wonderful R.C. Bray. I was so excited that I got to have him. He had just done The Martian. He was a really, really up-and-coming name at the time. Also, you really don't know how many words in a book that you have made up until your narrator is asking you how to pronounce those words, which you then have to figure out how to even pronounce the words. I liked the way they looked. I didn't actually know how a lot of those words sound, so a lot of the ways that I had pronounced them before in my head was not how they should actually be pronounced. Now, audio editions, when they came out, did very well, and Dämoren was an Audio Award finalist for Best Paranormal Audiobook. I traveled to New York for the event, and I finally got to meet R.C. Bray in person. Terribly nice guy. Meanwhile, I was already working on a sequel for Dämoren. While Dämoren was written as a standalone novel, I didn't want to have it be where I was committed to write so many books in order to finish a single story, so I just wrote it as a standalone, but with plenty of room for sequels to be added on to. I decided that instead of following Matt and Dämoren for the next book, I wanted to change things up and focus on a different hunter and their weapon. So I planned for the second book would be Ibenus, following Alan and his magic Khopesh that allowed him to teleport. And I knew that I wanted this one to have this love story angle, but I hadn't really figured out I'd done the human plot for it. I still hadn't figured out all the kinks of the main action actual plot, what it is that the hunters are facing for this one, so I was still kind of bouncing a few ideas around. But, at the same time, as a few weeks after I'd finished Dämoren, my wife and I then went for a kind of extended weekend off in New Orleans, and I was inspired by so much of what I encountered there. It's no wonder so many stories are based around that city. So I would get back to my hotel room and just jot down everything that I had seen, and smells, the sounds, the emotions that I felt, and I just kind of wrote all of this down in this kind of little journal just while it was still fresh in my mind. I ventured up through an alley that was outside the French Quarter, kind of snuck into an alley, and I peered in this little courtyard behind one of the houses, and I had the high walls that were capped with, broken glass, like, bottles that were stuck in the concrete and smashed so nobody could climb over them. And I imagined what it would be like to wake up in the courtyard like that, naked and covered in blood, the house locked and filled with bodies. And I tried to figure out, how it is this person would have gotten there in the courtyard, and what happened to their clothes, and what it was they were going to do now that they're awake. So I returned home from that trip, and I tried to keep working on Ibenus, trying to figure out some ideas for it, but every time I started trying to think about it, my mind went back to New Orleans and that courtyard and trying to build more and more on top of that. So eventually I just had to concede that this was the story that I wanted to tell, and I began writing Hounacier's book 2. And I like to tell people that Hounacier was the book that pretty much willed itself into existence because it wouldn't let me write anything else until that was out of my system. Hounacier was a pretty big deviation from book 1. Dämoren had a large cast with machine gun fights and big explosions and glow hopping and save the world plot. Very action adventure. Hounacier, however, was a murder mystery horror novel that was only set in a single city, and we only follow one character, and the stakes are very personal. Instead of being world-changing stakes, it's really just you're fighting for the life and soul of one person. Then to top that off, the hero of the novel, Malcolm Romero, really isn't a likable character in the first book. He wasn't a bad guy, he wasn't a villain or anything like that, but he was somebody that Matt clashed with a lot in Dämoren, kind of like an Iceman to Maverick, right? A good conflict character. So I needed to write Malcolm in a way that he would be somebody that the readers would be coming into this novel disliking him because he was such a jerk to the protagonist in the first book, and turn him into somebody that the heroes would enjoy very quickly, because I knew I wouldn't have much time for that. And Hounacier ended up being a pretty dark novel, the darkest one that I've ever written, but it's also my personal favorite of the entire Valducan series. Once it was completed, I sent it off to Ragnarok, and Hounacier was published in 2015. R.C. Bray returned for the audio edition, and that won the Audiophile Earphones Award and was also an Audio Award finalist for Best Paranormal Audiobook. Meanwhile, during all of this, I started writing a few standalone short stories in the Valducan universe. I called them my archive adventures, as if they had come out of the Valducan archives that appear in the novels, and they were all set in the period before Dämoren was. Now, the first one of these that I wrote, The Vampire of Somerset, was a 1930s vampire hunt set in England, and I love the heroine that I made for that, Lady Helen Meadows. She's one of my very favorite Valducan knights that I've ever written, and it was planned to be in the Grimoire of Eldritch Inquest, and they accepted it, and then they moved it to a sudden planned Volume 2 anthology, and then nothing after that. Eventually, the publisher folded, and the story returned to me, and The Vampire of Somerset still hasn't seen the light of the day. Maybe one day it'll see print, but this was the story that actually started all of the different archive adventures that I wrote. This is the idea that I had that kind of made me start wanting to write more of them. Now, the next one, The Serpent's Army, that did appear in the Not Your Average Monster anthology, and it's sort of a 1980s buddy cop story following Clay and Schmidt when they were young and they're tangling with an enthralled biker gang outside of Dallas. Cohesion Press released 2 Valducan shorts. The first, Hungry Eyes, appeared in Snafu Hunters, and it followed a younger Malcolm Romero as this kind of new junior knight who's with a team that's searching for monsters that are lurking in the Paris catacombs. And it served as sort of a prequel to Ibenus. The story was later then re-released in Snafu Medevac, a charity anthology raising funds to help James Moore. Sadly, Jim passed away a week before this recording, and he was a very nice and talented man. The final Valducan short to be printed was Raid on Wuvelsburg and Snafu Black Ops. It's a 1940s adventure set during the Second World War as the Valducans are trying to recover some of the magic weapons that have been plundered by the Nazis. It also includes the Chimisi Cauldron, which is a very real and creepy gold cauldron the Nazi made that was discovered in a lake back in 2001. And the story also got to feature Lady Helen Meadows in it in her official debut, even though this was her second story to appear in, but this one was the first one she actually got to see print in. Now, by the time Ibenus was released in 2016, Ragnarok Publications had grown significantly. They'd worked out a distribution deal, and my books were now in wide release in bookstores, and I finally got to drop by random bookstores and see my books on the shelf, which is awesome to have. The cover artist, Sean King, was brought in for it, and to keep consistency, Dämoren and Hounacier received updated covers as well, and they looked fantastic. Book 3 returns to Europe and primarily follows Alan Havelock and his Khopesh Ibenus. We're back to an ensemble cast. Both Matt from Dämoren and Malcolm from Hounacier returned for it, and while the first book was thematically kind of a fish-out-of-water action adventure, and then Book 2 was this New Orleans noir horror, Book 3's primarily themes were love and tragedy. I do some pretty terrible things to my heroes in this one. This is the first Valducan novel to be multi-point of view, from different characters' points of view, as we get to explore more of the Valducan order itself and the bond that the hunters have with their weapons. I'd always described this being a deeply emotional connection that all the hunters have with the specific weapon that chooses them, this incredible love with the entity that's inside the weapon. And I had a few reviewers early on that kind of confused that for being like a sexual thing, making some odd claims about my character as a result of that, which I think this says more about those reviewers than it does about me. In Ibenus, the Valducan knights venture into the labyrinths beneath Paris to root out a particularly nasty nest of monsters. It also explores how secret societies can operate in the age of surveillance and internet conspiracy theorists, and I particularly enjoyed getting to flesh out some more of the characters from Book 1. There were so many that I introduced in that one. I had a huge cast. I really didn't have much time to delve too deeply into a lot of them, and Ibenus really allowed me to kind of explore and expand on that and kind of really round those characters out a whole lot more. Book 4, Redemptor, was another change of pace. Again, we follow an ensemble cast, but this time across South America. It also introduces the monster hunters from the Valducan, a rival and threatening group I'd mentioned to and alluded to in previous novels, but never actually shown them actively. Now, instead of trying to stop some plot by demonic monsters, the villains of Book 4, for the lack of a better term, is an anti-paladin who's armed with his own sentient weapon. The tagline that evil isn't born, it's forged was an idea that my buddy Clay Sanger had suggested to me back when he was originally doing beta reading for Dämoren. So this had been rattling around in my head for a few years, and I was kind of happy to finally get to have a story just to go with that logline that he gave me. Now, the book's underlying theme is worthiness. Many of the characters wrestle with trying to prove themselves and living up to what's often very self-imposed expectations, whether one of them's the Valducan's newest knight, a teenager who's trying to escape the shadow of her fallen predecessor. Another one of them is a Catholic hunters who has kind of her own issues that she's dealing with. And even the villain of the novel believes himself to be this righteous savior, but he's really just this truly insane and pure evil. But he's trying to achieve some sort of worthiness for this kind of quest that he believes he's on. Now, Redemptor is also the first Valducan novel that expects the readers to have at least read one of the previous books. Now, the first 3 books, I wrote those in a way to introduce all the concepts of the world and kind of catch the reader up on what's going on if they hadn't read any of it. But, by the 4th time you're doing this in a novel, it's just kind of exhausting to explain again how everything works in a different way than you described it before, because you don't want to just repeat the same conversation. So I figured that anyone's going to be picking up Book 4 of a series, they kind of have it coming to them, and they shouldn't be surprised if they're a little lost at trying to figure out who these people are or kind of what's going on. Redemptor was scheduled to be released in 2017. Sean King had made the cover, and everything was turned in on time, and top that off, Ragnarok was already in talks with companies that are wanting to translate and distribute the series in Italy and in Spain, and on the surface, everything at the time was looking great. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Ragnarok had grown really fast in those few years since I had been there, and they were putting out a lot of books, and with the distribution deal costs and everything, that was pretty steep costs that they were dealing with, and Ragnarok was never really the best about paying on time, and I chalked all that up to being growing pains, but payments did come. well, a little bit slowly, but then eventually the payments stopped coming altogether. Now, this was causing a few issues with me and with all the other authors there. And some of the more successful authors that Ragnarok had acquired, Rob J. Hayes and C.T. Phipps, they pulled their books entirely around the end of 2016. Now, Ragnarok at that time begged me to stay with them. They promised that they were going to get me caught up on all the payments, and they were going to be merging with another company that would give them a big kind of cash infusion, as well as give them some really experienced people there. So I decided I was going to go ahead and stick around, and I was going to kind of weather the storm with them because, once again, it's growing pains of a new company, and I had been with them since the very beginning. Now, by this point, I had already left my normal day job in the summer of 2016, and then by November of 2016, I'd finally taken my friend's Tom advice and started up a YouTube channel, which at that point, it had only been a single recording of Mr. Lichthofen that I had made for a podcast, but after 2.5 years since he suggested it, I decided that I could make videos about tabletop role-playing games and other nerdly things, but at that time, my channel really wasn't making money at all. I had less than 1,000 subscribers, and I was still trying to figure out how this whole YouTube thing worked and finding my voice. So while author royalties weren't my sole means of income, they were pretty damned important to me because I didn't have a day job anymore. By summer 2017, the Ragnarok merger had gone through, and I still hadn't been paid yet, and I was getting pretty impatient with them. Right? I was just completely out of patience. Now, the original owners, they were gone, and I got some of the money that I was still owed, but there was still a lot left that they owed me, and due to some terrible bookkeeping on their part, I had no idea how much that I was owed. Now, this was also the time that Redemptor was entering the editing phase. Now, my original editors were now gone, so my new editor had just been promoted up from office manager and had no, if not entirely no editorial experience at all, if she had any. She was unfamiliar with any of the previous books, which that was fine, except for this was the book that I wasn't going to explain how the world worked and all that, because we're at the 4th in a series, but she didn't even understand the fantasy genre itself. She didn't romance. They actually had to explain to her that fantasy didn't just mean romantic fantasy. So when all those edits came back, it was bad. I mean, in all my years of publishing short stories, my previous novels, I'd never once doubted my editor's abilities. I'd always had full faith in them. Even if we disagreed on something, I'd always considered them to be the authority. But the edit requests that I got back were just terrible. Many of them were just plain wrong. They were just incorrect. They're actually adding mistakes to it. And some of the comments that were in the margins of it were just baffling, to put it kindly. So it's just unbelievable how bad of an experience that was going through the initial rounds of edits. Now, the Valducan series had always been one of the most successful series, if not the most successful series that Ragnarok had published. And now with the other authors that were gone, it was definitely the biggest property that Ragnarok still had. So I would have at least expected a capable editor to be assigned to it, especially when the same author is currently owed several $1,000 and they're threatening to leave. So when they missed their latest payment deadline right about this same time, that's when I went ahead and pulled the plug and I withdrew all my books from Ragnarok and I left them entirely. The new owners were not happy, but the breakup went pretty smoothly until it didn't. And then the breakup got pretty damned ugly. Now, it took a few months to get all the rights returned to me as, different distribution contracts had to run a certain course, but I did receive all the money for the print and the ebook and everything for all the previous sales there, but the audiobook royalties, which audiobooks were always the bigger seller with the Valducan series, I never saw the full royalties for those, or even the full sales numbers for the audiobooks, so I have no idea how much I was owed for them. Audio rights did eventually return to me, and now I get full royalties and full sales reports sent directly to me, but those first couple of years of sales, the peak years of those sales, it's still a mystery what all was sold. Anyway, so at this point, I've got 3 Valducan novels and 2 Black Raven collections that have lost their publisher. I have 1 new novel, but it's the 4th in a series, which makes that a lot harder to sell if it's the 4th book in a series. And they didn't give me the contact names and the info for the publishers that were wanting to do the foreign language rights, so all of those deals have fallen through that I was looking forward to. So, I'm frustrated, everything has gone badly, and I'm feeling a bit lost, to be honest. Now, around this same time, Steve Feldberg with Audible Studios reached out to me. He'd seen my announcement, what was going on, and with 2 of the 3 Valducan audiobooks being Audio Award finalists, he offered to go ahead and do this as an Audible original directly with me, just, me and Audible with no publisher in the middle because I didn't have a publisher. So we did that, and they got me a great editor, they gave me a nice advance, and R.C. Bray returned, and we released that in early 2018 as an Audible original. Meanwhile, my buddy and former Ragnarok author C.T. Phipps had reached out to me. He had severed ties with Ragnarok about a year earlier, but he managed to move all his books over to Crossroad Press, and he was absolutely glowing with how well that they treated their authors, and they paid everything on time very punctually. So with his referral, I got them to accept all of my former Ragnarok titles, or at least the print and audiobook versions. I maintain all the audio titles of my own now, but then 6 months after it was released on Audible, Redemptor was finally released in print through Crossroad Press, and I have been extremely happy with them. It's really great having a publisher that does all the stuff that they're supposed to do, like pay on time. Ragnarok, meanwhile, went under in November of 2017. It broke my heart to see them go, but business is business. So that's the story of my Valducan series, and it's had its share of triumphs and setbacks, but I am extremely proud of this series. And in the 10 years since its debut, my life has changed so much because of this, including this entire channel here, which I originally started as a way to help promote my books, but because I'm also really terrible at self-promotion, I'm sure a lot of my longtime viewers are probably watching this video and only now realizing that I'm a published author because I never really talk about that much. Now, of course, I've got links to buy all these books in the video description below. If anyone wants to buy them, then great. And if you enjoy them, then please leave a review for them. That'd be wonderful. But this video isn't about promoting the Valducan series. Once again, I'm pretty bad at self-promotion. But it's really more about just the journey itself and reflecting on that and kind of where it was and how it brought me to where I am. And that's really all I wanted to say.